Hi everyone, welcome back to Motivate. I'm Dr. Mohi Saraugi, a GP by profession, but here I'm swapping prescriptions for perspective. Over the past few weeks in the UK, several newspaper headlines about vitamin D have been circulating online. You may have seen them. Experts issue warning to anyone taking vitamin D supplements. NHS warns high vitamin D intake could damage vital organs. Strong headlines designed to travel quickly and understandably unsettling. But, as is often the case, the headline was louder than the content. So, let me clarify something from the outset. There has been no new NHS announcement or directive regarding vitamin D, no sudden shift in national guidance, and no international body has revised its core recommendations. Most of those articles were referring to something much more specific: the risks of excessive supplementation, taking very high strength preparations, stacking multiple supplements, or self prescribing doses well beyond recommended limits. In clinic, this media cycle translated into more worry and more requests for testing. And perhaps that confusion isn't surprising. Vitamin D has had quite the public relations journey. It began as a quiet bone vitamin, then it became the immune hero, then the inflammation regulator, then the mood stabilizer, then the longevity molecule. When a single nutrient is asked to span orthopedics, immunology, psychiatry, cardiology, oncology, and aging, it's usually time to pause and apply calm scrutiny. In the UK, we follow NICE guidance, and those recommendations around testing and dosing have not suddenly changed. So, wherever you're listening from, this is a clarity episode. Today, we are talking about the only vitamin that tends to host much of the northern hemisphere for half the year: vitamin D, or as I sometimes call it, the introvert hormone. It only shows up when the sun does. But beneath the headlines and the hype, vitamin D is something far more interesting. It's a hormone shaped by evolution and activated by light. So, today, let's take a clearer look at vitamin D: what it truly is, where it comes from, how it works, and where nuance matters. So, let's begin. If you're going to understand vitamin D properly, we have to go backwards. Let's rewind to 19th century Europe. Picture industrial cities: London, Glasgow, Manchester. Coal smoke thick in the air, narrow streets blocking sunlight, children working indoors in factories instead of playing outside. And something troubling began to appear in large numbers. Children developed bow legs, enlarged wrists, delayed growth, and soft skull bones, skeletal deformities that were impossible to ignore. Doctors were baffled. This wasn't rare, it was epidemic. Rickets, a childhood bone disorder where bones soften and bend because they fail to mineralize properly, most commonly due to vitamin D deficiency. And here's what makes this fascinating. When some of these children were sent to seaside towns, places like Brighton or Blackpool, many improved. No pharmaceuticals, just light. At the time, nobody understood the mechanism, but clinicians noticed the pattern. Sunlight mattered. Britain became central to the early recognition of rickets, so much so that historically it was sometimes referred to as the English disease, not because it belonged to England, but because industrialization made it visible there first. Then came cod liver oil, which, let's be honest, has traumatized generations. Parents armed with a spoon, children negotiating terms of surrender. But it worked. By the early 20th century, researchers discovered a fat soluble factor in cod liver oil that prevented rickets. Fat soluble means the body can store it rather than simply excrete it. So, vitamin D can build up over time, which turns out to matter late. Eventually, scientists identified the active compound. It was labeled with charming simplicity vitamin D, the fourth vitamin discovered. A, B, C, D. Creative brilliance was clearly not the priority. But then came the first twist. Vitamin D is not technically a vitamin. A vitamin is defined as something you must obtain entirely from the diet because your body cannot synthesize it. Vitamin D, you manufacture it in your skin from sunlight, which makes it biologically a hormone, and not just any hormone, a steroid hormone, already far more interesting than its branding suggests. In your skin, there's a precursor molecule called 7 dehydrocholesterol. When ultraviolet B radiation hits this molecule, vitamin D3 is formed. This photochemical reaction is ancient. It existed in organisms long before humans. As humans migrated out of equatorial Africa into northern latitudes, skin pigmentation adapted. Melanin, our skin pigment, protects us against ultraviolet damage. But melanin also reduces vitamin D production. So, lighter skin in northern climates wasn't cosmetic, it was metabolic adaptation. Skin color, in part, is a biological negotiation with sunlight. And then, in less than 2 centuries, we industrialized, we moved indoors, built upwards, and blocked light. We changed our relationship with the sun faster than evolution could recalibrate. Rickets wasn't inherited fragility, it was environmental mismatch. And that idea that modern environments can expose biological vulnerabilities is something we are still navigating today. By the 1930s and 40s, vitamin D fortification began. Milk, cereals, margarine. Rickets rates fell dramatically. It became one of the early public health success stories. Then came caution. In the 1950s, cases of high blood calcium levels were reported in infants, and excessive vitamin D fortification was suspected as a contributing factor. Vitamin D increases calcium absorption from the gut, and too much vitamin D can lead to too much calcium in the blood. So, policies tightened, fortification was reduced, vitamin D quietly retreated from center stage until the immune system entered the conversation. In the late 20th century, researchers discovered vitamin D receptors or VDR on immune cells, macrophages, T cells, dendritic cells, cells that detect infection, coordinate immune responses, and prevent the immune system from attacking your body itself. Suddenly, vitamin D wasn't just about bones, it was about immune regulation, about antimicrobial peptides, and immune tolerance. And once a molecule touches immunity, everything becomes interesting and occasionally over enthusiastic. That's when vitamin D began its second life. From bone vitamin to immune modulator to inflammation regulator to possible cancer risk modifier to longevity candidate. So now let's look more closely at the molecule itself. What exactly is vitamin D? There are two main forms, vitamin D2, ergocalciferol, largely from plant and fungal sources, and vitamin D3, cholecalciferol, from animal sources and the form your body makes in your skin. In your skin, you carry that precursor molecule we mentioned, 7 dehydrocholesterol. When ultraviolet B radiation hits it, it converts into cholecalciferol, vitamin D3. So, yes, you're technically solar powered. Vitamin D is inactive when you make it and when you ingest it. It must undergo two activation steps. First, in the liver, where it becomes 25 hydroxy vitamin D, the form we measure in blood tests. Then, in the kidneys, where it becomes 125 dihydroxy vitamin D, also known as calcitriol, the active hormone. Calcitriol then binds to the vitamin D receptor. Most people think vitamin D equals bones. Yes, absolutely. But that's a bit like saying the NHS is just paracetamol. Technically present, but missing the architecture. Because once calcitriol binds to the vitamin D receptor, it influences gene expression, adjusting cellular behavior at a molecular level. Now let's come back to bones because they are still central to this story. Vitamin D's most established and least controversial role is in calcium regulation. Calcium is more than a bone mineral. It is essential for muscle contraction, nerve conduction, blood clotting, and cellular signaling. And your body guards blood calcium levels very tightly. If calcium levels drop, the parathyroid glands, small glands sitting behind the thyroid in your neck, releases parathyroid hormone or PTH. PTH tells the body to do three things: increase calcium reabsorption in the kidneys, increase calcium release from bone, activate more vitamin D. Activated vitamin D, calcitriol, increases calcium absorption from the gut. Without adequate vitamin D, calcium absorption drops. That triggers a rise in PTH, which increases bone resorption and bone weakens over time. In children, this leads to rickets. In adults, it leads to osteomalacia. Osteoporosis and osteomalacia are not the same thing. Osteoporosis is loss of bone density. Osteomalacia is failure of bone mineralization. Vitamin D deficiency is classically linked to osteomalacia. Osteoporosis is multifactorial: age, sex hormones, mechanical load, genetics, overall bone turnover. Vitamin D plays a role, but it is not the sole driver. Vitamin D does not build bone on its own. It enables calcium to do its job. It is permissive, not dominant. And that distinction matters enormously when we talk about supplementation today. Now, remember that receptor we mentioned earlier, the vitamin D receptor? Vitamin D receptors are present in over 30 different tissues in the body, including brain, immune cells, muscle, pancreas, cardiovascular tissue, which means vitamin D's job is not limited to calcium transport. It influences gene expression across multiple organ systems. But the presence of a receptor does not automatically mean dramatic clinical effect. Think of receptors as switches. Their presence does not mean it is constantly flipping the lights on and off in a way we can see clinically. Association is not causation. When vitamin D binds to receptors in immune cells, it modulates immune behavior. It supports innate immunity, the rapid first line defense system your body deploys. It supports antimicrobial peptides, proteins that help destroy invading pathogens. It also plays a role in immune tolerance, preventing the immune system from overreacting or attacking self tissue, which is why low vitamin D levels have been associated with autoimmune conditions. But association does not mean that high dose supplementation cures autoimmunity. Large randomized control trials have not shown vitamin D to be a miracle intervention. Correction of deficiency is beneficial. Megadosing is not magic. There is a difference. Long before molecular immunology, clinicians noticed that tuberculosis patients improved in sanatorium, places built around rest, nutrition, and sunlight. We now know that macrophages, immune cells that engulf pathogens, require vitamin D to mount optimal antimicrobial responses against organisms like Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Sunlight therapy had biology behind it. During the COVID 19 pandemic, vitamin D was heavily discussed. Observational studies linked lower vitamin D levels with worse outcomes. But controlled trials showed little benefit from supplementation in already sufficient individuals. What we can say with confidence is this: deficiency is harmful, correction is reasonable, but vitamin D is not a substitute for established public health measures in conditions like COVID 19. It is foundational, not heroic, and medicine works best when we respect that distinction. So let's bring this back to clinic. Who actually becomes deficient in vitamin D today? Despite everything we've discussed, deficiency is still common and not always for the reasons people assume. Latitude matters. In much of the northern hemisphere, from October to March, the sun sits too low for meaningful vitamin D synthesis. Even bright winter sunshine produces very little. The same applies during winter in the southern hemisphere. Add modern life to that: indoor work, remote working, sunscreen use in summer, which remains important, air pollution, cultural clothing practices, increasing screen time, and reduced outdoor exposure. And vitamin D deficiency becomes understandable. Now, let's be precise about higher risk groups. People with darker skin living at higher latitudes are at increased risk because melanin reduces the efficiency of vitamin D synthesis. It simply means longer sun exposure is required to produce equivalent amounts. Breastfed infants are another group because breast milk contains very little vitamin D unless maternal levels are high. Older adults are at risk because the skin becomes less efficient at synthesizing vitamin D with age. Individuals with malabsorption conditions such as celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease, or after bariatric surgery may struggle to absorb fat soluble vitamins. Chronic kidney disease matters too because the kidney performs that second activation step to convert vitamin D into its active form. Certain medications, including some anti-epileptics and long-term glucocorticoids, can affect vitamin D metabolism. So deficiency is not rare. But here's the important nuance. Common does not mean everyone needs a blood test. In clinical practice, we measure 25 hydroxy vitamin D, the circulating storage form. Globally, levels are often interpreted broadly as below 25 nanomole per liter, deficient, 25 to 50, insufficient, above 50 nanomole per liter, adequate for most people. Some countries use slightly different thresholds, and there's ongoing debate about what constitutes optimal. But we must distinguish between adequate and optimized. They are not the same thing. Routine screening is not recommended. We test when there are risk factors, symptoms, and when there is a clinical reason. Fatigue alone in an otherwise well adult with no risk factors is not automatically a vitamin D blood test. More testing does not automatically mean better health. Sometimes it simply means more numbers to interpret without context. So, what does vitamin D deficiency actually look like in real life? In children, the signs are often skeletal: delayed growth, bone pain, and in severe cases, deformities. In adults, it is usually more subtle: persistent bone discomfort, proximal muscle weakness, for example, difficulty climbing stairs or rising from a chair. In more significant deficiency, diffuse musculoskeletal pain. Fatigue and low mood are often mentioned, and here we need nuance. Both are common. Vitamin D deficiency can contribute, but it is rarely the sole explanation. Correcting true deficiency can improve symptoms, but vitamin D is not a cure all for modern life. So let's talk practically. How much do we actually need? In the UK, official guidance recommends a daily supplement of 10 micrograms. That's 400 international units of vitamin D. Children aged 1 to 4 years are advised to take this amount throughout the year. For older children and adults, supplementation is particularly important during the autumn and winter when sunlight is insufficient for meaningful vitamin D synthesis. People at higher risk, including those with limited sun exposure or darker skin living at higher latitudes, may require year round supplementation. Breastfed infants should receive vitamin D supplementation from birth unless they are receiving adequate amounts through fortified formula. If someone is found to be deficient, higher doses are prescribed temporarily under medical supervision. In some countries, this may include weekly high dose preparations. For example, 60,000 international units taken once a week for a defined period. But those doses are therapeutic. They are not designed for indefinite, year long use. Once deficiency is corrected, most people transition to standard maintenance dosing. Taking high dose weekly vitamin D long term without monitoring is unnecessary for most people. Vitamin D is fat soluble, it accumulates. The generally accepted upper safe limit for long term daily intake in adults is around 4,000 international units per day. Over the counter availability in countries where high dose preparations are easily accessible does not automatically mean lifelong use is appropriate. Correction is targeted, maintenance is measured, and both deserve clinical guidance. Vitamin D toxicity is uncommon, but it is real. It does not cause extra bone, it causes hypercalcemia, too much calcium in the blood. In clinical practice, significant hypercalcemia can trigger urgent evaluation. Symptoms may include nausea, constipation, confusion, excessive thirst, and kidney stones. This does not occur from sunshine. Hypercalcemia has other medical causes, but in the context of vitamin D, toxicity is almost always related to excessive dosing. And this brings us back to those recent headlines. They were not warning about vitamin D itself, but about oversupplementation without indication or supervision. Recommended doses are safe, excess is not. Now, let's talk briefly about sunlight. Vitamin D synthesis in the skin requires ultraviolet B radiation. That's different from ultraviolet A, which penetrates deeper into the skin and contributes more to aging and skin cancer risk. Ultraviolet B is strongest when the sun is high in the sky, typically around midday in summer months. In winter, at higher latitudes, even bright sunshine may not provide enough ultraviolet B for meaningful vitamin D production. Also, this is not an invitation to abandon sunscreen. Sun protection reduces skin cancer risk. It is important. In real life, people rarely apply sunscreen perfectly enough to block all vitamin D synthesis anyway. The goal is not to chase sunburn. It is sensible, safe exposure, and supplementation when required. And before we close, let's clear up a few things that often cause confusion. You may hear that vitamin D must always be taken with vitamin K2, a claim often repeated in supplement marketing. The theory is that vitamin K helps direct calcium into bone and away from blood vessels, and that taking vitamin D without K2 might lead to calcium being deposited in the wrong places. It sounds plausible, but current evidence and major guidelines do not show that routine K2 supplementation is necessary for people taking standard doses of vitamin D and eating a balanced diet. Then 10 minutes of sun is enough. It depends on place, skin tone, season, and time of day. You can get enough vitamin D from diet alone. In northern climates, that's difficult without fortified foods or supplements. Sunbeds boost vitamin D safely. They do not, they increase skin cancer risk. Higher vitamin D means better immunity. Correcting deficiency supports normal immune function. Mega levels have not been shown to create super immunity. Everyone should test their vitamin D yearly. Testing should be guided by clinical context. And perhaps the biggest one, if I feel tired, it must be vitamin D. Sometimes, often, no. Which brings us back to where we are now. A molecule first recognized because children's legs were bending, now discussed in the same breath as aging pathways and autoimmunity. Science has range, but beneath all of it, there's something quietly grounding about vitamin D. It reminds us that human biology is not separate from the environment. We are not detached from sunlight. We are not independent of geography. We are organisms shaped by light, latitude, culture, and time. And when we understand that, something shifts. So, if you take one thing from today about vitamin D, let it be this: respect the dose, correct deficiency, avoid extremes, sunlight when sensible, supplement when appropriate, test when clinically indicated. More is not better. Enough is enough. Because health is rarely built on intensity, it is built on balance. And perhaps that's what vitamin D has been teaching us all along. Health feels less like optimization and more like alignment. I hope something today stirred a thought, gave you a smile, or simply made you pause. Thank you for listening. I'm Dr. Mohi. Until next time, stay motivated. And remember, sometimes coming home to yourself isn't about doing more. It's about recognizing what was sufficient all along.